Well, maybe we should go ahead and get started since it is 6:32, and if anyone else joins, then that will be great. How do we proceed with roll call? Who does that? Do you do that, Todd? Is that the process?
I usually do that, yeah.
Okay.
So you call it to order and then I go ahead and do the roll call.
Okay, I have called.
Great, thanks. And I always start, I just have the chair and vice chair at the top. So when I call roll and do votes, you all will usually pop up first. So Mary.
I am here.
Catherine.
Sorry, I am here.
Sorry, caught you off guard.
Yeah.
Jeanette.
Here.
Great. Chantel.
Here.
Ernest. And I think we said he's not here. Jessica.
Here.
Laura. I believe she's not here. Sue.
Here.
Tabia. I don't think she's joined us yet. Andy.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
And Lindell.
Here.
And that's
Okay.
it. And it looks like Allison just joined us and we have currently 4 attendees as well.
Great. Well, thank you all for your patience as I figure out how things work, and feel free to point out if I am messing with deeply held traditions. But so why don't you all join together and read our mission together. Act as a strong advocate to
Justice
and equal opportunity by providing citywide leadership and guidance in the area of civil rights. Boy, that Zoom delay is pretty funny, isn't it? Next up is matters by the public comment.
Yep. And so, Mary, generally what I do is just let members of the public know that if they would like to comment during this time, they can raise their hand using the raise hand function on Zoom. If you're joining by phone, you can use *9 and that will show raise hand. We currently have 4 attendees in the public and no raised hands. So maybe we'll give it a moment. If anyone wants to raise their hand to share during public comment, you'd have 3 minutes to do so. I don't think we have any raised hands, but I'll keep an eye on that.
And we have a second opportunity later in the meeting, right, for additional public comment. I'm going to skip past commission response to matters by the public, since we didn't have matters by the public, and move right into the minutes of the December 17th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 17th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So sadly, we have
want-
to do a vote.
Oh, we have to do an individual vote? Okay.
Yep. Sorry about that. Who
Take it
was
away.
the second, by the way? I didn't catch that. It sounded
Catherine.
like a couple of people. Catherine was great. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go through and Mary, I won't call on you this time because in votes, the chair just breaks tie. So Catherine.
Yes.
Great. Jeanette,
Yes.
Chantel,
Yes.
and Ernest hasn't joined us. So Jessica.
Abstain.
Great. Laura is not here. Sue.
Yes.
Tabia has not joined us. Andy.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
And Lindell.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Moving into business matters. Our first matter under business matters is an overview and question and answer with Eric Steinecker about the Fair Housing Assistance Program. And I guess Eric will just turn it right over to you.
Everyone, so I'm not exactly sure how much I should give as far as background on the program. We did have an in-depth conversation with Todd earlier last fall. So if there's any questions that you have, I think it might be a little bit easier, to talk about back and forth. But in general, HUD provides FAP funding to on a non-competitive basis annually to state and local agencies that administer fair housing laws that provide rights, remedies, and procedures that are substantially equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act. So what that means is that, we have funding on an annually, so the agencies would get paid once a year. And, obviously there's different types of funds, which I could break down a little bit later if we need to, but it's non-competitive. So it's not like it's not like a different type of NOFA where you have to wait for a notice of funding and you have to apply with an application every year. It's basically once your law becomes certified and you join our program, then it's really just ongoing every year. While HUD does provide significant resources to the agencies in the form of training, technical assistance, and funding, the agencies must demonstrate a commitment to, also have support of the region, of the administration, have the backing to operate on their own in a way that demonstrates a commitment through professional and complaint processing. So the idea is, most of the money that we give out is actually in the form of complaint processing funds. We also give out what we call administrative cost funds, and those are funds that can be used to really cover costs that you might incur in administering the program. And then we also give training dollars, which is based on the number of FTEs there are, but it's money that can be used to help develop staff, also can be used as far as like travel costs associated with approved trainings. So just to let you know, there's what we call 2 phases of substantial equivalence of certification. There's interim certification, which can last up to 3 years. And that's kind of a trial period, where we don't expect you to be operating at a fully certified level yet. It's there for, there's less oversight in the sense of we can give you more of a block money and you might be able to have more free reign to spend it how you might need to build your capacity. And then once you get up to a level of where you're operating at a at full capacity, then what we do is we turn it into a full certification. And so that first phase, we sign what we call an interim agreement, and that really dictates it's more like the contract of the whole grant. Which again, sorry, we're not grant. It's because I forget that, in federal government term jargon, it's its own, word, it's a term of art. So we work on cooperative agreements and we basically pay for performance rendered. And so once you get to fully certified, then that certification will last 5 years. There are assessments done by the regional level. So we have regional offices. So you would be under HUD Region 3. And then they have GTRs and GTMs, government technical representatives, government technical monitors, who will really be the main contact. And those are the ones that you'll notify when you receive a case. Those are the ones that will work with you and help build your capacity, create, offer any technical guidance that you might need to administer the program. And then every 5 years, what we do is a recertification process. But every 2 years, at least, there's what we call performance assessments. And that's where the monitor will usually, in a non-pandemic world, go to the agency, look at case files, have conversations with staff. And there are a certain number of performance standards that must be met. And those are codified in the regulation. You need to have quality complaint processing. You must limit use of administrative closures, which, for those types of closures where a full investigation isn't done, there's that you need to attempt to conciliate and resolve a complaint throughout the investigation process, that you are obtaining meaningful and adequate relief, that you're doing education outreach. And then I think 7 is where there's minimum number of cases that must be processed every year to be considered reasonable. And we have tiers depending on the size of the jurisdiction. It will vary, but just to let you know that there is some sort of minimum caseload requirement. And the idea is that if you're not hitting that number, then you might need to do more education outreach. You might need to reach out to partner with organizations in the community to help boost those complaints.
I have a question about that, but would you rather that we all wait till the end, or can I just bop in here with a question now?
I'm all for the back and forth. I think it helps. So any question you have is welcome.
I mean, we're a pretty small city, so I assumed we'd be kind of at I don't know how many tiers there are, but can you give a sense of kind of what the minimum number of cases that would be expected to be handled by a, kind of fairly small city?
Yes, bear with me. It's in the form of guidance. I'm just pulling it up. I had it earlier. I don't want to misquote. So as of now, a reasonable number and what's the population right now estimated?
Is it 45, 50,000?
5 to 50.
So then you would be in the first tier, which is anything under 90,000 people. You're expected to process at least 4 cases a year. So you're supposed to receive and process, which means that you take the complaint, you file the complaint, you either try to settle it, or go through a full investigation. Obviously, sometimes cases, if there's a non-responsive complainant or something, you'll close the case and that would still be counted, but it would be what we call an administrative closure, but it's still a processed case. So the expectation is that you would at least, and again, during the capacity building stage, there's, you're not going to be underneath those same standards. It's really once you become fully certified.
What is a non-responsive complaint? Is that when, well, what is it?
Well, there's different, what we call closure codes or administrative closures. Sometimes the complainant is non-responsive, like you just can't get a hold of them, or a non-cooperative person where you ask for stuff over and over and they don't give it to you. The respondent moves and you can never get a hold of them, right? If there's no way to get in touch. So, or if it's non-jurisdictional, that's an administrative closure. If it's a withdrawal without resolution, so that's what have you. And we actually still compensate the agency. So we pay, so per caseload, or, per case, we compensate the agency for their time and energy. So for a fully investigated case in 2020, we were paying agencies $3,000 a case. For an administrative closure, it would be about $1,500. And then if there's what we call an effective conciliation, so if there's a conciliation agreement, a settlement that includes meaningful relief to the individual, as well as what we call public interest relief, which usually is relief to help, alleviate any future discrimination. That's the form of training, policy changes on behalf of the respondent. Then we would give the an additional $200. So an effective conciliation is $3,200. And then
I missed the number of cases for under 90,000 population cities.
4. And again, during the capacity building stage, we wouldn't really hold you to that because you're building your capacity. We have discretion to give up to $120,000 for the first year for capacity building funds. It can go up or down depending on how much you're using and need, but we can work with you on that. Now, the benefits of joining the program are that this is the ultimate idea of federalism, where the local government entities should be enforcing in their own civil rights matters. And so we're here at the federal level to help support and promote and build capacity at the local level to as much as possible. About 80% of all fair housing cases are actually done by state and local governments, and HUD only holds about 20% of them. So the vast majority of fair housing enforcement across the country is done by state and locals. And the benefit is, again, like I said, we offer you funding, training funds, capacity building funds, and once you become fully certified, we also offer, in addition to complaint processing, we have other funds like partnership funds. So you'll actually get money to go out and do education outreach, partner with different agencies, or you can do testing if there's a FIP funded agency in the area. But there's, the funding and the support is there. Now I want to, bring the caveat that, it's also on the agency to produce and to investigate quality investigations. And so these obligations, what we try to, we want to make sure, and some best practices that we encourage is, oh, go ahead, Sue, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify how long the capacity building stage was. Is that what
It's
you call
up to
the
3
interim,
years.
Up to 3 years?
So
Okay.
if you build your capacity in the first year and you're ready to become a contributions agency, we can transfer you over in year 2. Again, it's basically you get more money, but you also have more responsibility. It's kind of the caveat to rushing into full certification. So, but that's the idea, is that in this first period, it's helping build you up. Now, what we say is that it's also, again, an obligation that when cases move forward, that, if you find discrimination, that you actually take the case through final disposition. That means that if it goes, you'll either have a hearing on it and hold it, an administrative hearing and issue a final order on the merits, or that you'll take a case that you find that you have reasonable cause, we call it here, to believe that discrimination occurred. Then, if you don't go through an administrative hearing, you also allow the parties to elect, what we call it. And that's where you would actually, the agency would take a case forward on behalf of the complainant in a civil action. And then we give money once a case is filed. We'll give an extra, what we call post-cause supplemental payment. So we can give $8,000 if it's filed in court, which will help with costs. Or if it's an administrative hearing, we would pay the agency $5,000. But that's with, again, the understanding that, the whole goal of the program is to provide funding in a way that supports the work, but it's not meant to cover 100% of the cost. It's really, the local jurisdiction should be supportive of the agency. What we also find sometimes is that there's conflict between the agency and the legal office, so the city attorney's office, or at the state level, the AG. And then there's some concerns about capacity, where if you're doing other types of investigations, so if you're doing public accommodations issues, employment, then you need to at least have 20% of your resources, your funding, your staffing dedicated to fair housing. So that's kind of we want to make sure that that you're in it enough to give the resources that the agency needs to thrive as a substantially equivalent agency.
And that's kind of where I was coming up with my next question, but you've almost answered. We would have to have a certain amount of staffing to begin with, I would think.
Yeah, so we have some small agencies and jurisdictions that are definitely smaller than Charlottesville. And sometimes, there might just be a half an FTE. It's so, dedicated, or, one full FTE. And some, again, it's about capacity. Can that full FTE, who's an investigator, do they have the capacity to help, to investigate cases, to bring cases forward, and to settle, right? So that's also some of the idea of some of that initial upfront money where it's meant to help support and augment filling a position.
Mhm.
Again, the caveat is that it's not meant to pay for it because that funding eventually runs out. And that's where you need to demonstrate that the city supports the agency and is giving it enough resources to meaningfully, help with, addressing issues in fair housing.
Curious if you could tell us a little more about the 20% requirement being dedicated to fair housing. I mean,
So it's go ahead.
I'm curious about what activities are kind of included in that, because we do get a lot of housing complaints, but they're not all necessarily Fair Housing Act related
So
complaints.
it's 20% of the budget is dedicated. That's kind of the easiest way to think about it, is that it's dedicated, education outreach or funding the investigator, materials in support of fair housing. It's that 20% of the budget. And that's the idea, is that, it's at least 1/5 of your energy is going towards fair housing, right? And resources. And so it's going to depend agency by agency. That requirement is also, like I mentioned earlier, more when you become fully certified. So there is this grace period again to try to get up and running. But with the understanding is, if you don't have the support of the city, the jurisdiction of, of the rest of government, then we find that it's not as a successful type of a program. And one thing to look at under the regulation is that maybe I should put it into the chat box, but the regulation governs pretty much, a lot of the details of the program and administering the program. We have guidance that helps augment it. But if you look at 24 CFR, part 115, that's the reg. And I can copy and paste the
Yes, please.
in the chat, sure. So Cornell has a very nice database. It's the only reason that.
And Eric, just so you know, I shared the copy of the ordinance where you inserted all the comments and the different statute references and sent everybody links to each one of those statutes as well. So they should have those.
Oh, great. So under 307, which is part 3, it talks about requirements. It talks about budget and finance requirements, reporting and record keeping provisions, testing, training, the data support system. So the idea is that you're going to use our system to put in cases. So case processing system, that you still becoming an agency requires that you follow other civil rights requirements, that you as an agency don't discriminate, that you don't handle cases with the First Amendment, that you give them to us if that some of these constitutional issues come up. Subcontracting, which is one of the comments I did notice, that you're not allowed to subcontract. Most of it details what functions you can't subcontract out. So that might be worth looking at if you're trying to partner with other agencies. The idea is that you as the agency are the ones doing the investigation, coming to the decision yourselves, and then enforcing that decision if you find reasonable cause. And then the other thing to look at is under part 2, and that's the performance standards under 206. But before we even get there, under 204 is the criteria for adequacy of law. So some of the issues that I highlighted in your draft ordinance would probably fall under 204, and that's basically everything that's in 2.4 needs to be somewhere in the ordinance.
Eric, can you talk a little bit about just thinking about staffing, what the requirements are for having separation between the investigation and the initial decision process? So if an agency has half an FTE, how does that work?
That just means on an average week, they're dedicating half their time.
Right, I have that, but I assume
so, for an agency investigating 4 cases a year, you're probably not going to be dealing with the housing every day, but you should at least be moving those things. You should be moving, cases forward that are, that need to be investigated, helping conduct education outreach, basically creating events, going out to the public, partnering with other organizations to get the message out there. And again, the 20% requirement is really the budget. So 20% of the actual money should be going towards fair housing activities.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think I asked my question very clearly. What I'm actually asking is if you need to have an investigation, and then you need to make a decision, and then you need to move forward to enforcement. All of those roles can't reside, I would think, within the same person. So I'm wondering how offices are generally structured, especially small offices, to ensure some separation.
So I can first explain HUD's process and then maybe highlight some deviations that I've seen. But at the end of the day, it really varies on how the commission is and/or agency is set up, with their relationship with one another, what have you. Some agencies don't have a commission at all. They're like part of the AG's office. So we have a couple, partners that are just, housed in the attorney's section, into the legal section. But I'm going to combine requirements with, there's timeliness requirements with investigations. So if someone comes to HUD and files a complaint or complains, they say, I've been discriminated against, right? That's not necessarily technically a complaint yet. What you need to do is go through an intake process, get more information, make sure that it's jurisdictional. And then, so you have usually within HUD, ideally you're supposed to have within, I think, 10 or within 20 days, supposed to file a complaint. Now, if that means that you kind of drafted an official complaint form, it's finalized, you open up a case file or a complaint, we call it. And then your obligation as an agency would be, hey, HUD, we have a complaint that someone came to us. You're supposed to notify us that, and we call it dual filing. We'll assign a HUD case number to it just to track it, but it would also probably have your own agency number. And then you have, after a complaint is filed, you need to send notice, right? Proper notice to the complainant and the respondents that the complaint is filed. You're going to give the respondent up at least 10 days to be able to respond, or 10 days to respond. And then you as an agency need to start the investigation, what we call, begin the investigation within 30 days of the complaint being filed. And that's usually after they sign it. And then the notice is sent out. So then you have 30 days to start the case, and then 100 days ideally to finish the investigation, about 3 months. And if a lot of cases might not be able to finish in 100 days, then what you would do is send 100-day letters saying that it's still under investigation. The timeline is that once, that's 100 days to investigate, and then you have up to a year for final disposition if it's like going in front of a hearing body. So if you find reasonable cause, then you'll issue a determination, and then you'll give them instructions on whether or not, if they get to kind of, because if there is a hearing body that would hear the case and adjudicate it, then you also must afford them the opportunity to go to court. And it's basically, the right to due process. If you don't have a hearing process, then you need to take the case to court automatically. That's more resources, so that doesn't have the 1 year time frame on it. But often what happens more often than not is cases settle and conciliate. And what you would do is draft up a conciliation agreement. And then, those usually have monitoring terms where you want to monitor that performance has actually been rendered, that the respondent actually made a check or changed their policies or went to training. So those functions, at least getting through a case, could be done by one person. investigating, conciliating, even, some agencies have mediators that they kind of hire, or that they just separate, that's their only function, is to settle cases. And you can kind of add in, if they're on the budget, then you can kind of add in some of their FTE time. At HUD, it's the regional director will determine if there's cause or not. So then usually you'll have an investigator doing the settlement and the investigation. Then you'll have maybe a director making the decision on behalf of the agency. I don't know to what extent some agencies might have the person do all three. But then, once that happens, then it's on behalf of the agency to bring the case forward. So it could be someone else bringing that case other than the investigator, who then becomes the representative. And that's going to depend on the legal relationship with the attorney's office, with the way that local laws give authority to do so. That's kind of all changes jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Like I said, the main requirements of what needs to be in the law are identified under 204. And then everything from there is really, there is quite variance depending on the jurisdiction and how they might handle certain activities as far as the investigation process goes. So I hope that answered. I don't know if that was a long-winded way of.
Having looked at our ordinance, would we clearly have to amend our ordinance before we would be able to enter into such an agreement?
So the process is that the formal process is outlined in the regulation, that you will bring a substantially equivalent law forward with a letter, and then you'll ask for an official, and then it needs to go up to our general counsel's office. But as we mentioned to Todd earlier, we kind of, given that, both me and my director are both attorneys, and he used to do these substantial equivalence reviews when he was in OGC. So we've kind of give this informal review of issues that should be addressed first. Joe has always mentioned that we don't want to necessarily give a stamp of approval of anything that's not already codified into law. But what we do is we work with agencies to get that up to speed to a degree that we think is good enough, and then you pass the law and then you bring it forward, because doing a full review. And the other thing to mention is that this process does take time to become certified. It's not overnight. And so it's really great to have these conversations while we, if you're really interested and you have the buy-in of your jurisdiction, it could take up to a year and a half to really get into the program. Now that's because we give you feedback on your law, then you're going to have to eventually put it into, you're going to actually have to pass something, and then it's going to have to become back to us in a formal request that we send up the chain and on our end. Again, we try to do everything up front so that by the time it gets there,
is that for the interim agreement to start? You would have to have the ordinance updated in order for that to start. Or are you saying you can have basic agreement on what the ordinance needs to stay and be able to start it? Or does that?
No, the idea is that the law needs to be in place, because there's no guarantees other than that you would be able to afford people the same rights and remedies and procedures.
Got it.
So the rights need to be there, the remedies and the procedures all kind of need to be there.
And we keep referring to our ordinance, you keep referring to law. Are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the term of art is a substantially equivalent law. Now states, usually at the state level, they call them laws, city level, they call them ordinances. It depends, but yes, anytime I say law, the law itself is the ordinance. Because again, we want to have that codified because that's the only way to guarantee that the rights, remedies, and procedures are going to be actually enforced.
Eric, if I may ask a couple of questions. You mentioned the software that the agency needs to enter their case data into with HUD. Is that a software that the agency has to pay to access? I know that sometimes the software systems have a fee, things like that.
No, it's called the HEMS. It's called HUD Enforcement Management System. So it's our own HUD system. We created it. We maintain it. A lot of agencies actually complain that, well, we have to put it into both our systems, and the idea is that it's part of the compensation we're giving is, to put it into our system. And that's really the only way we have, any idea what kind of enforcement actions are being done, what kind of reliefs being obtained. And so, but there are some smaller agencies who only use that, and that's fine. That's quite all right. So in terms of the case processing, system, that's just again a requirement of the program down the road, but it's free. Obviously, it's just that we get you signed into it. We add the jurisdiction, and from there we'll be able to pull cases every year. We can give reports back to the agency as far as what kind of cases are being done or what kind of closures are happening, and that helps with assessment.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And then another question that goes into the enforcement, and once there's a determination of cause, and let's say it needs to move into a civil action in general district court, is the agency required to provide the legal representation for the complainant? Is the agency actually representing the complainant in the court?
So we've had this conversation, and it comes up different formats with different jurisdictions, and that's because some jurisdictions, they don't have the codified authority to act. It's the agency is required to bring a case forward on behalf of a complainant. That doesn't mean that you represent the complainant. That means that you bring it as the city, on their behalf, like that and that's kind of what happens here. Like once a case isn't brought to a civil action at HUD, HUD will either host an administrative hearing or DOJ will come in, usually it's the city attorney's office will come in and represent, bring the case on behalf of the complainant in court. Now they might have their own counsel, what have you. You're representing the commission or the agency. And that's a distinction that some offices challenge. What we say is what happens if legal doesn't agree, and that's the beautiful dance that most civil rights agencies have to deal with. The remedy to that is that if there's a case where you think there might be discrimination, there might be cause to believe that discrimination occurred, bringing in legal early and having them involved with it throughout the investigation process will help ensure that they're on board the whole way. Instead of trying to do the full investigation and then we go to legal and then they ask for us as an investigator to go back, and interview and collect documents. The idea is that once it gets into a formal adjudicative standing, you're going to have to do formal document requests and formal. It's much more formal, so it's easier to get this information at the investigative stage. And what we say is once you get any hint that there might be some reasonable, there might be cause to bring in the city's office. And the best functioning agencies are the ones that have a good relationship with their legal office.
I had one other question about the activities that would be covered. If we were to take on, for example, a study of discrimination in housing discrimination in the city of Charlottesville, would that kind of activity be covered?
You mean in terms of the 20%?
In terms of the 20%.
I think it's vague for a reason. If I can play the vagueness, it depends lawyer card. So again, the idea is that the city is committing to the fair housing enforcement as well, that it's not just us propping up an agency. And to that extent, the reg only says, at least 20% of the budget committed to fair housing activities. I would assume, I'm not the monitor in Region 3 who would oversee you. So, it might differ depending on how the monitor sees it, but I would assume that a long-term study about housing discrimination and challenges would be a proper use of that funding. Now, is that just one grant for that one study, or is that part of your budget every year? That's kind of where it might depend if it's really only just 1 year. But again, these program requirements under 307 really are once the agency is fully certified.
I did have two questions. Todd asked one of them, and I feel like I understand it, but I wasn't quite clear the question that he asked about legal representation for a complainant, and if the Office of Human Rights represents it. You kind of like did a dance where you're like you bring it up to court, but you're not necessarily representing the complainant. And I just had a question around that. So if there's someone who can afford legal representation, are you saying that that person just would not have it and they would just be representing themselves, and the Office of Human Rights in our case would just be there as like bringing it up to the court on just like a formal thing?
No,
Like,
so usually they're still intimately involved, and I guess the distinction is that the attorney bringing the action forward isn't representing the complainant; they're representing the agency, and the agency has reasonable cause to believe that discrimination occurred in its jurisdiction. So that's it. It's more of a legal nuance than actual difference in terms of the case moving forward.
okay.
And the representation, and this really comes into play when certain cities might not have legal authority per their ordinance to bring a case on a private citizen.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where, like, to represent private parties. So that's kind of where, like, the city's attorney might not have that in their jurisdiction, in their authority, codified in the ordinance. So that's kind of where I was trying to highlight that it's not that you are the city attorney isn't, the client's personal lawyer. Right. They represent the agency, and they're bringing the case on behalf of the aggrieved person.
Okay.
If I can, I'm kind of curious about that too. And if I understand it correctly, it's like, for example, like there's like a certain amount of money that particular client might, like it's a $500 thing that they're out for some reason, but the thing that the city would actually sue for is because that person's civil rights were violated, not because of whatever the specifics of that case are. Is it?
Well, no, so the damages will, usually when you're asking for damages, there's compensatory damages to the individual or individuals, if it's a group, aggrieved persons. That's one thing that the city would probably ask for. The city would probably also ask for injunctive relief, maybe to have them stop doing that, whatever they're doing. They might call out for punitive damages. So that's kind of one of the things, is that punitive damages must be available in a civil action. So they might just want to punish the person for discriminating, and then there's also, when you're in a hearing format, it's not just the aggrieved person's compensatory damages. You need to have the authority to bring civil penalties on behalf of the commissioner. So again, you in the form of the attorney representing or bringing the case forward is going to probably be asking for different, additional damages beyond just compensatory damages for the agreement.
Thanks for that. That was actually really helpful. And then the second question I had, before you were explaining kind of the process of, just like how long it would take and the hoops or things that you would have to jump through for like our office to be a FAB. And I just wanted to ask, so we have kind of been in this conversation, the office has been in this conversation with HUD for, on and off for a year and a half. And you said that you did like the informal feedback on our ordinance. Is it fair for us to assume that, like, if we say theoretically we were to update our ordinance and it had all of your feedback integrated into it, would that ordinance be at the standard then for Charlottesville to start moving forward with becoming a FAP and entering the like MOU agreements and all those things? Or was your first pass really just kind of like baseline and there's other things that need to change about the ordinance?
How about both? When we say that it takes about a year and a half, you know, we're already into it. So we just want to basically make sure that agencies are aware that this isn't just an overnight switch. It's going to depend on, you know, different parts of the department, you know, basically approving. OGC will do a review, and then it will ultimately be approved by the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing to let you in. That is kind of timelines that we can't really guarantee and control. Obviously, right now there's a transfer of administration. You know, that being said, Joe and I have tried to convey the whole time that we are here along the way to kind of help bring you up to speed, to help get your law where it needs to be to even bother OGC with it. They might have an additional concern or two where they say, in addition to the things that, you know, we've highlighted, here's something else that you need. Again, you know, my director, Joe, used to do that for OGC. So we're giving you a pretty good feedback as far as the big substantive issues. And kind of once you put another draft together, I'm happy to, you know, review it again and try to hold your hand through the perfecting of the ordinance. What we try to tell people is the most substantially equivalent version of the Fair Housing Act is the exact verbatim language of the Fair Housing Act. So wherever you might have some concerns about a certain provision, cutting and pasting the Fair Housing Act is substantially equivalent to the Fair Housing Act insofar as the law itself is concerned. Now, that also down the road needs, you know, interpretations of the law need to be consistent with the Fair Housing Act as well, and how it's worked in operation. But I hope that helps explain, like, you know, we've already considered that we're in this conversation with you. A lot of times we give the feedback about here's what needs to change in the law, and we don't hear from interested jurisdictions again. Or they might come through like 3 years later and say, okay, well, here, you know, how about now? And they maybe don't realize that, you know, things might have changed, or that their law, again, they never put it into effect. So we can't take this formal review up, but that doesn't mean that we can't keep providing you, you know, assistance along the way. And that's part of what we meant as far as the year and a half.
Thank you.
We had another agency who applied, I don't want to say, it's a state level agency who came in and like basically said, hey, our legislative session is starting. Can we be certified? You know, can you tell us that our law is perfect so that we can pass it and get it up to speed? And it's, you know, we only have a small window, and that's kind of where we have to push back and say, again, this takes time, and it's because it's not just our office that has to review and concur. But we try to do everything we can to do that. So where as soon as you do formally request, it's as good as it can be for OGC.
Thank you. This was so helpful and informative. Do we have any other questions from Todd or from commissioners?
Yep, Andy.
So the one quick question I had about sort of understanding our local staffing and requirements. So would part of the money be able to be used for local salaries for staff?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically different types of funds. So I'll give, again, it depends, but capacity building funds have a lot more leeway to be able, you know, it's really on you as an agency to determine where you need the resources. As long as you're kind of falling within the performance requirements that we set, so the money is, you know, it's flexible as to what it can be used for. Once you become fully certified, the case processing money is really just a compensation for you processing the case. And it's not really, there's not really strings attached to that. It's assumed that some of the funding that's going to come from us is going to help support the program. There's administrative cost funds, which are basically, you know, that's just, it's based on the size of your jurisdiction. And then there's a locality adjustment if you live in a high cost area. That's kind of calculated no matter how many cases you do. Oh, no, sorry. It's calculated by, yeah, there's the different funding types, and that's in part 3 of the regulation too. We'll break it down once you become fully certified. There's some caveats, but again, it's a compensatory type of a program. You know, we're paying for your performance, not necessarily. It's different than a grant, which would be for, you know, this specific activity. Training funds is really the only thing that needs prior approval, as well as what we call partnership funds, where you're doing partnerships with other entities. Those are going to have a little bit more regulations around them. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Yeah, because I'm thinking more in terms of the picture of, you know, how we would talk to our, you know, city council and whoever's looking at the budget, city manager, you know,
so for instance, we gave,
we would have.
Yeah, so for instance, we had the CARES Act, right? Mm-hmm. That actually gave us our specific program, FAP, $1.5 million that we had to distribute. We gave it out to, and basically we sent out a request for proposals. You know, what do you need and what do you want to spend it for? And some of the money was spent for hiring an additional staffer for the year to help with the backlog because of that COVID, you know, caused. So, I mean, yes, some of the funding can be used for an FTE. The idea, again, is that 20% required just means that we're not propping up the program. And, you know, if we were to we want to see it, you know, that the jurisdiction has a commitment to fair housing and is actually giving it resources too. But I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. That's.
And again, during the capacity stage, the idea is that we're helping build your capacity, right?
Right, and so because it's not. I think it's important too for it to be a regular stream too. So if we have a additional staff on here to do this investigative work, that they can count on from one year to the next, having, you know, some of that salary be compensated by administering this program. So just wanted to make sure that it also can go towards the salary as well.
Oh, right. Yes, and there are some small jurisdictions that actually crank out a lot of cases, and they get, I'm sure that helps support them because, again, you're getting the case processing funds for the case that you processed. And then it's basically what we do is you'll have an account through eLocks. It's an electronic funds distribution system that the government uses. And then, you know, once we fill out the forms for the year, generally it's paid at the 4th quarter of every year. So what we do is we calculate complaint processing from the start of Q1 or Q4. So July 1 through the following June 30th is the case processing period. And then the last quarter we spend trying to calculate everything up, and then we'll give a big disbursement into your online account, and then you'll have 5 years to draw that money down. You know, some agencies pull it right away because they need it, and then some, it's a hard time and we have to nudge. It's like, here's the money you need to use. But that's kind of how it works, is that we put it into a fund and then you draw down from it. And the more cases you process, you know, you'll get more money.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful.
And once you become fully certified, you'll at least get training and admin funds. We calculate it differently depending on the cases and the size of the jurisdiction, but and then how many FTEs you have. But those are regular streams, and then the complaint processing is really what might vary year to year. And I think that's kind of the idea behind the minimum caseload is we're giving you this money, you should at least be doing that, and then we're still going to pay you for that.
I noticed that Tina has her hand raised, Vice Mayor McGill.
Thank you. I just had a question. I noticed that one of the key issues in the ordinance is various areas that allude to subcontracting by the city manager. And since the human rights ordinance applies to more than housing, and I understand that the subcontracting can't happen for the housing issue under this, would it be able to state that the city manager could seek outside assistance in these other areas except for housing?
Certainly, and what a lot of jurisdictions do is that they'll actually create a separate fair housing ordinance under it, a separate, as far as detailing investigation procedures, right? A lot of agencies or a lot of jurisdictions will try to merge employment, housing, and public accommodations, kind of list them as all the discriminatory actions, and then they'll have one subsection detailing investigative procedures. And that's where a lot of the issues rub, especially because EEOC requires different procedural requirements than us. And so a lot of the jurisdictions that have joined our program will actually have a completely separate ordinance or subsection and say, you know, discrimination in housing, investigating complaints in housing, and then just really delineate that housing is its own beast, and then everything else, you know, whether or not public accommodations or employment is different. And this is where we actually might encourage that, because we had, we had the state of Missouri, Kansas City, and St. Louis were all in the program. And then a employment law was amended. And really they were just targeting employment, but because it was written so, you know, it was written all together, it ended up affecting their substantial equivalence. Because their law was so meshed, we had to eventually let them go from the program. And it was kind of a bummer for the localities, especially, you know, Kansas City and St. Louis, because it was the state level law. And then they had something in their ordinance that required that they be substantially equivalent with their state law. So it's like they borrowed our language with substantial equivalence, but then it pinned them in a corner because now they're tied to the state interpretation. So that's kind of where I think a reason a lot of jurisdictions might have separated it out, including the procedural provisions. And so that might be a way for you all to do it if you want to keep the subcontracting component. The other thing you can do is just write an explicit language, you know, this does not apply to, or in cases other than housing, you know, to qualify it. But it might be a little bit messier if there's, because another thing is that once you have a draft that starts citing to other paragraphs or provisions, you know, as interpreted by this or that, then it's really convoluted and you have to kind of go all over the place to really see what your rights and remedies and procedures are. So that's one way around it.
So Eric, I know we'll have to wrap this up shortly, but if we have additional questions after today, I assume we can kind of funnel them to you, perhaps through Todd?
Certainly, I'll also give my email, so you can also just, if you do have any questions, reach out.
That'd be great. You want to put that in the chat? Or?
Yep, so it's right there. You know, we're here to serve you, and like I said, 80% of all fair housing enforcement that comes through the building is actually done by state and local partners. And the idea that, you know, civil rights should be enforced at the local level is very much a pillar of the program. So any questions, I'm always available.
Yeah, we really appreciate your making time for us this evening.
Of course, here to serve.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to jump off if there's no other questions.
We'll be in
Thank
touch. Thanks.
Sounds great. Thank you for your interest.
So it's my view that I know you all have been talking about this much longer than I have been on the commission. And I do think that we should be prepared to make a decision, soon with regard to, whether we want to go forward. But I would propose that we think about it in terms of our February strategic planning meeting, because we are talking about committing 20% of the work of the office if we go forward long term, and we don't know whether there's a comparable requirement for the FIPA agreement. So we could be talking about, if we entered into both of those things, really committing even a majority of the work of the office. And maybe we want to do that, but it'd be nice to have all that information kind of gathered. Todd, do you think we'll be able to get the kind of information about the sort of comparable information about FIPA before that strategic planning meeting?
Yes, so I did get a hold of James Yao over the kind of towards the end of the year, and he offered to meet. He was not as interested in coming to one of our commission meetings, but said he'd be willing to meet with you and Catherine and me whenever it works before. And I think we could schedule it before the retreat so we could gather that information ahead of time. But yeah, I had put an invitation out also to attend the retreat and present, but I think he would rather just go ahead and have a smaller meeting in advance of the retreat. So we can talk about that offline.
Sure. I do want to give, an opportunity to commissioners to, while this is fresh in everybody's mind, to share thoughts, if we want to do that now. And then we can, I think, expect to have the goal of making a decision about whether we want to proceed down this road at our strategic planning meeting come February. But I open it up for people to share thoughts, questions, reflections.
So thanks, Todd, for inviting him. That's I feel like that's the most sort of substantial information we've had about the HUD agreement. So I really appreciate getting that information. It does, like, sort of getting the outlines of this does make it feel a little more doable and more real. So so I definitely appreciate that, because I think, Mary, you're saying you don't know the history of it. It's sort of been this thing that we say we need to do, but it doesn't feel like we've gotten to this step before. So I feel like this has been a really big step in moving in that direction. So appreciate having him on.
Sue?
Yeah, I totally agree with Andy. It feels like we put some flesh on the bones a little bit here. And I really would love to spend whatever time you figure out we can do at the retreat to dig into this a little further and see just where we want to go. Like Andy says, we've been talking about this. People have been bugging us about it, and we've never had until tonight really a real feel for what it all involves. And if you can work it into the retreat, I'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should make a decision at that planning meeting. Now, it could be just a decision to,
Right.
to take the next step to explore, but I think that would be my goal, is that we would be able to kind of make the decision there. Any other thoughts? Okay, great. Todd, thank you so much. That really was really a helpful presentation. Next on the agenda is the director manager hiring discussion. I think I asked for this to be added to the agenda. Todd and I presented on Tuesday night to City Council, and we really emphasized the need for hiring for the director position. And I thought I would raise with you all the idea of whether we should take any further action to ask City Council to move that forward. I mean, do we want to take, kind of a stand as a commission? Do we want to, write them a letter asking for hiring? Do we have kind of further thoughts about the qualifications needed? And so I kind of open that up for you all and your thoughts.
I'll keep talking. If we don't get staffing in this agency, as he referred to it, in this commission, and if we don't get it soon, I don't see how we can do much of anything real. And I can't, I can't tell council that they've got to crack down on it, but this has gone on too long. It's almost a year now, almost a year that we have been without a director. We have looked at the criteria. I don't see what else we need to do about that. They need to just simply, I know they're short of people that need to be hired, but this has got to be a priority if they think this is an important commission.
Jeanette?
I'll just add that I think now that there's a new city manager, we'd been kind of, the city council had asked us to wait until that process went through. And I think, yes, I think we could reach out to the new city manager. Perhaps you and Catherine could ask for a meeting to just begin to establish that relationship that council asked us to maintain, both with council and the manager, and put forth our proposal and also bring it forward to city council. I agree. I also understand that the city has multiple priorities and so much to work on, but I think we can bring it up in a proactive and positive way.
So this is Catherine. I agree with that. I think we should try to get a meeting with the city manager. I do think that we should take a look at the job description and be ready to make some recommendations for the job description. They may not be ready to hire for this, the Human Rights Office, before they've hired the deputy city manager, but that's not a reason for us not to be forward with what we think we need.
If I may comment on that, I know during the last council meeting when Mary was presenting, Vice Mayor McGill actually requested to see the recommendations that the commission had put forth before, as you all had spent quite a bit of time doing some revisions, and we had put that together in an agenda packet for the joint work session in August of last year, which was never able to come to fruition. So I did just email, maybe it was yesterday, the whole agenda packet to council, because I'm not sure that they ever even got it. I had sent it before when we were in anticipation of the meeting, but I don't know, sent it to the clerk, but I don't think with the cancellation of the meeting, it maybe never made it to council. So they may just now be seeing those recommendations that you put forth before, but those exist still. So if you wanted to revisit those ahead of another meeting with the city manager, that's available. So
I think I really resist the idea that we should acquiesce to the notion that other positions have to be filled before this is advertised. I think that way lies madness. I think we're looking at another year of not having a director if we do that. Hiring for high-level positions is hard, and I think we should say, it's my view that we should say that they should hire, they should get an ad out and they should begin the hiring process for this position immediately. If they have a commitment to this Office of Human Rights, they need a director. Jessica?
Sue's hands was up
No,
for
but-
mine.
I've spoken, go ahead.
We'll get to it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to attend the council meeting. So can you give us an update on like how that went and their response?
Sure, I was going to do that in the chair update, but it makes more sense here.
Oh,
No,
okay, yeah. it
No
just-
worries, no
I'm
worries.
lost. Yeah.
You're right. So Todd and I presented the ordinance, and for the most part, there were a lot of questions. There were very small suggestions, minor suggestions that were mostly, I would say, kind of picayune, syntax or clarification modifications that were requested, and it would be the council agreed that it would be added to the consent agenda for the next council meeting to be voted upon. We also did spend a fair amount of time emphasizing the need to hire a director, and that point was made, I think, by both of us multiple times at the meeting. I mean, councilors did seem to acknowledge that it was important, but I think taking the next step and getting a commitment to moving, immediately, we haven't gotten that commitment yet. Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation that the staffing decisions were made under the previous actual city manager. And there was a lot of discussion about that structure. I don't know if the current actual city manager is going to want to do that same structure or not. There was a lot of discussion about that structure when Richardson put that through. And it put the Human Rights Commission in a very junior position at the time. And so I don't know if that is something that is set in stone, or if the new city manager is likely to come up with his own structure. And so, that's why I think we can and should continue to advocate for a permanent director as quickly as possible.
Andy, you had your hand up? Or did you?
I didn't, but I think having a meeting with the new city manager is definitely a key part of this. So I agree with Sue about the organizational structure questions are also something to make sure that the Human Rights Office director has sort of enough authority in the city to really be effective.
Yeah, I resist the notion that any of that is set in stone. I mean, it seems like it's our job to advocate for what we think is right and appropriate, and so we should move that along. So absent objection, Catherine and I will move forward to kind of set up meetings, and it may make sense to put something in writing in addition, so that people who can't be at that meeting will also have access to our position. Oh, I see that. Sina, do you have your hand raised at this time, or is that from earlier?
I actually just raised it.
Great.
I just wanted to, as I'm looking over the job description, especially in light of hearing from the HUD representative, if the Human Rights Commission in particular really does feel like we want to continue down with the HUD path, the job description might want to be relooked at. If that made sense. I'm sorry. It just seems if we're gonna head towards some more of that enforcement, and it might be a good idea to add some of that into the job description, essential responsibilities and duties.
That makes sense to me, and I think we had talked about that a little bit at the council meeting. I don't know whether there was an ad hoc committee that worked on that. I'd be happy to take a stab at some, suggested edits that the commission could look at next time, unless were other folks who are already involved in doing that.
We did have an ad hoc committee and we met together as a team, but that has, that work closed. So I think if you wanted to take a look, and we had discussed possibly adding some of the skills and qualities around more of this, today's discussion. So I think having those in there as, adding, I think that the suggestion is a good one. Sorry, counselor's suggestion is good.
I mean, you guys have done so much work already that if what we're just adding a little bit about sort of, legal background or enforcement authority, like I'm happy to just draft something and you guys can react to it at the next meeting. Okay, great. Anything else on the director? Todd, anything that you want to say about that?
No, I think the only other thing I was going to add, is that to show folks what some of the suggested changes to your recommendations for amendments to the ordinance were. If that's helpful, if you want to see those. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. I added it kind of at the last hour right before the meeting to the agenda packet as I was finalizing a few things. But if you'd like to see that, I can screen share it just so you know what we're going to present to the attorney's office for their approval, and then to the clerk. The turnaround timeline is we have to the clerk tomorrow for inclusion in the agenda packet for the February 1st council meeting for the consent agenda. But
well, our next matter on the agenda is the staff report. So why don't we move right into that, and you can share that and anything else you have to share.
Okay.
One quick question about the HUD stuff. Did you send a link, or where's the information for the whatever the code that is pulling from for our ordinance?
Yeah, so in the agenda packet, there is, of course, the ordinance with Eric's comments on it. And so what I did is I pulled all of his comments out and put them in a separate Word document that I sent to y'all.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm wondering where the original federal regulations are.
Yeah, in that document, there are hyperlinks to all of the federal documents. So those hyperlinks link to the Cornell site. It's a little bit easier as a site to view federal legislation through Cornell rather than to go through the actual federal government site. So those links should get you right to the exact ordinance that the statutes that he's referencing. So,
okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Lindell, you had your hand up, right?
Yes, thank you. I did have a quick question about council's response to the ordinance. And I heard, I believe I understood that they were not ready to deal with it right now or to make any decisions. Did they give a time frame for dealing with it? And if not, I would propose that we ask for that we ask for a date or time, at which they will give us something, because this could just go on for months and months and months. If
I believe they are to take it up at the next council meeting. That will be on they finally, there was a lot of kind of talk around various things, but in the end they agreed that it would be on the consent agenda for the next city council meeting, and they would thus, unless absent some change, they would vote on it then.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
No, that's okay. It was a very confusing and
okay.
discussion. No worries. Jessica?
Just quickly, I know we're agreeing to move forward with the request for the Human Rights Director, and Mary and Catherine, you guys are gonna move forward on that, but do we need to make a vote? I'm so used to us voting. It just felt, I wanted to know if we had to vote. That's all about that.
Unless a commissioner feels that we need to vote on this, I feel comfortable with Catherine and I moving forward. It's part of the requirement of the ordinance that there be a director. Okay, absent a call for a vote, I suggest we move forward. Todd, do you have additional matters for the staff report?
Yeah, I'll just, since we're kind of segueing out of the discussion of the council meeting, why don't I bring up the ordinance first, just so those who haven't seen the changes can. Give me a second because my screen share is a little bit slow, but it should work. Here. Give me a high sign when you can see it, because I don't know.
Got it.
Yay.
Okay, great. So let me get to the spots where some of the changes are. It's going to scroll a little bit.
You're frozen, Todd.
Todd, can you speak?
Yeah, you're frozen.
Todd, if you can hear us, it might be. Oh,
Nope. Todd just disappeared.
well, we'll give him a moment. I don't want to move forward to the next agenda item without him. So why don't we just.
I'd be happy to share the document on my screen if that would be helpful.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Did you get the changes that he sent late this afternoon?
So not what's in the packet.
No, it was not in the packet.
It's in the new packet that arrived this afternoon.
Oh yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah. Todd's back.
Yay.
Oh, that looks good.
Hey,
Todd, would it be helpful? I'm showing it here to save your computer from crashing. Just let me know when you want to move forward.
unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm jumping in. The computer's just acting up. So that's Eric's comments on the ordinance. You'll want to scroll down to the very bottom of the ordinance that I sent for the agenda packet that I just sent out maybe an hour and a half before today, if you have that. You'll go past my colorful spreadsheet. Okay, you're close. Page.
Oh. All right, well, go back.
Go back up where there's red,
Yeah,
right there.
There you go. Okay, so it's a really, the changes are very minor, but just want to make sure you know what they are. And the main addition to section 2-432 was we replaced the as well as with an and. That Councilor Snook called out, and more sense from the standpoint of the meaning of that subsection. In additional addition, Vice Mayor McGill suggested adding significant and demonstrable ties to the city, because the board just said with demonstrable ties to the city. And many councilors or multiple councilors expressed that concern that they really wanted to make sure that whoever was not a city resident had really strong ties to the city. So that was one addition. And then if you scroll down into the enforcement section, There we go. And so in this case, Councilor Stook noticed that we had used the word jurisdiction in this spot after we did the initial fact finding, how we would determine whether or not to pursue a case that somebody brought forward as a complaint. And really what we were trying to say there, rather than jurisdiction, was that the complainant presents a case that shows that there's actually something to pursue, being that there was a protected activity that the person was engaged in. They were a member of a protected class, and the respondent did something that violated the ordinance, and there was a harm. Basically, if it meets those criteria, that's what we mean by prima facie, then the director could authorize it for further action. So that was a better use of term there rather than jurisdiction, because we had defined jurisdiction to mean something else further up in the ordinance. So those are the two changes. I don't know if anybody has any questions or concerns about those, but basically the next thing that will happen is this will go to the city attorney's office. City attorney will review it, and if everything looks okay, we'll get that to the clerk, who can include it in council's agenda for the February 1st meeting for the consent agenda.
Todd, this is Allison. If these are the only two changes, I am happy to email the city attorney and say that it's fine to be sent to the clerk. It's not an issue.
Great. And I think Deborah has to convert it to an ADA accessible format that's a little bit more challenging because of the strike through. So I'll probably pass it back to Deborah for that. She knows how to do that.
Yes,
Thanks.
and just copy Lisa and Robertson, since she's the city attorney, and say that that it's been reviewed by me and it's ready to go once it's ADA converted.
Thanks. That'll speed the process up significantly. Great. And just as far as other things go, from my standpoint, you've got the giant spreadsheet of all the case or the individual service data. I've filled everything in. That's the entirety of 2020's data. So you can see the trends. You know, we had, I think, without looking at it, you know, it's about 1,500 incoming contacts throughout the year. That averaged about 5 a day. And there you go. That's even with having a closed office, a physically closed office. So people are still contacting us. It's, you know, the highest month of the year, I believe, was February, when the office was still open and I was still accessible on a personal level. And I think we had an average of 12 contacts a day. That was probably too much for one person, but anyway, it still points to the fact that people are coming to us. Their housing still remains the primary thing people bring to us. And certainly with additional staff, we could probably do more, especially if the office is physically open again. So I'll just leave it at that, and not too much else. You can read the report for any other details and ask me questions at any point.
Yeah, thank you. I think the data is like really nicely presented, and it's really helpful. Any questions for Todd?
Oh, one other thing, I'll add that I'll compile that data actually into a calendar year 2020 report, together with any data that we want to present on the goals that the commission achieved. Chantel and I worked on that for calendar year 2019. So Mary, maybe it might be helpful for you and Chantel and I to talk a little bit about that when it comes time to get to the Human Rights Commission part, just so you can kind of get up to speed on it. But I'll start working on that soon.
Yeah, that would be great. Moving into the chair update, I don't have a lot. I've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about our strategic planning day in February. And first, I want to thank all of you for trusting me with the responsibility of serving as chair. I think for all of us as commissioners, this is a weighty responsibility. This commission is charged with incredibly important work. And so as I think about the meeting that we'll have in February, my goal is really to come out of that with a commitment to one or two big things. And I don't know what those, I have ideas. I don't know what those things should be. And obviously we're going to spend much of that day talking about it, but that's really my goal. I think we would be most effective if we committed to something, to kind of one really important, significant matter. And so as I think about that, I want to encourage commissioners to um, think about that in advance, and maybe even to write down ideas and circulate it before we have that meeting. I would also say that if there are members of the public listening, I would encourage you to share with me or with other commissioners ideas for what we might take on. And just in the spirit of that, kind of the openness toward that meeting and thinking about what we might do, I do want to throw out an idea that I know other people have had that I've been thinking about, that is kind of an example of something I think we might be able to commit to and actually achieve in this year. And that is, there's been some discussion among members of city council and among advocates in the city of having the city commit to making sure that all tenants in eviction cases have lawyers. And there's some legal challenges with the Dillon rule and all of that kind of stuff, but there's certainly ways that the city could commit to doing that. And I mean, I think it would be fabulous if we decided that that was, for example, a thing we were going to push, and that we were going to be kind of singularly focused on making that happen over this year, and that we could actually do that. I'm very open to the idea that that's not the right thing, and that community members want something different, that you all think something else is, kind of a better use of our time. But I'm hopeful that we can kind of generate a few of these ideas to really kind of spend our strategic planning discussion, kind of wrangling about what is the most important thing that we can take on, and kind of the most, the way that we can be the most effective at creating a more equitable city. That is my report as a chair. I'm happy to answer questions or comments, thoughts.
My only comment is that I think that's a really great goal, making sure that everyone has a lawyer in housing cases. So +1 to that.
Well, I do encourage people that if you think about this, and there's certainly lots of other, important changes that we could make as a city to create a more equitable, less discriminatory city. So as people have ideas, like I encourage you all to circulate those. I think probably we think best when we've had a little time to mull big ideas in advance. Not that people can't have a great brainstorm at the strategic planning meeting itself, but if folks do have ideas about those kind of big picture goals, I encourage you all to raise them, to circulate them, and encourage, as I said, members of the public to inundate us with bold and audacious ideas for equity and fairness. Okay. Absent other questions or comments, I guess we'll move on. Next up are ad hoc committee updates. And I confess, I'm not sure which committees are set to update us.
We have none currently. We didn't, that's just a placeholder on the agenda, so there aren't any.
Okay, great. Then we are back to matters by the public.
We have 3 attendees currently, and no one has a raised hand. If you'd like to speak during matters of the public, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, or press *9 if you want to join by phone. And I'll call on you in the order that hands are raised, and members of the public have 3 minutes to speak if you'd like to. So no hands are raised at the moment. we can perhaps move on, but we can wait a second if you want.
All right, well, we won't have a commission response to matters by the public, but I encourage any members of the public to come to our next meeting and bring your bold and audacious ideas, because we really, really want to hear them. Next on the agenda are commissioner updates. Sue?
Yeah, I do have an update from the Virginia Association. They have set the next regular meeting for February 22nd, the Monday at 7 o'clock. I need to ask Todd, are you for sure that we have paid? And if not, why not? I haven't heard anything from the association treasurer recently. But I also will make sure that they have all of our new information if they don't already have it. So Todd, can you speak to that at all?
Yes, I confirmed with the treasurer that she did receive our check in the mail. That was a few months ago now, and so I don't know if the VHR has made any decisions about how they're going to do dues. I guess it would be due again because it's January, and based on the bylaws, and if they want to send us an invoice or request a list, that would be great. We'll happily provide it, but we have to have that invoice in order to get the money out of the city. So maybe
Well,
mention that.
It apparently they haven't done anything more about that. The last bylaws change group didn't meet because of somebody's illness, and the executive is meeting on the 15th of February, I think. And so I don't know what the agenda will be for the meeting on the 22nd, not a clue. And those of you who aren't aware of it, it's a fairly interestingly loose organization, if I can put it that way. Theoretically, every member of every commission is a member. And I will check with the treasurer to make sure she's got all of our names, if that's all right with you, Todd and Mary.
Great, thank you, Sue. Catherine? You're muted.
Yep, sorry. I just wanted to let folks know that on Sunday, the 24th, this coming Sunday at 1 o'clock, the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center is hosting a community conversation about the COVID vaccine. So there's been a lot of work done by UVA, and a number of UVA docs are quite high profile nationally, and we wanted to make sure that those high profile national stuff is actually getting to our community. So we have Shelby Edwards moderating it. It should be really, really great. It's through a Facebook Live event. So if you navigate to the Jefferson Schools Facebook page, you can find it and click there so that Facebook will remind you. But I put a direct link in the chat as well. So if folks could help me get the word out to the community, that would be wonderful.
That sounds great. Any other commissioners have updates? Want to share? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
I mean, we could stay and do other things, but
Yeah. I move we adjourn.
Second.
At a fascinating time frame.
okay. Todd, do we have to vote on this? We don't need a recorded vote on whether we adjourn. Okay.
No, I don't know
All
that
right.
anybody actually ever moves to adjourn. Often the chair just says, I think we're done. But yeah.
Yeah, you can do it.
I would just throw out there that if anybody has kind of interest in particular issues and wants to like spend some time just like tossing them around and thinking about them, I love doing that. So feel free to reach out to me if you just feel like, chatting about all the wonderful things that we might do. And I look forward to committing to something and getting some real new work done. Thank you all.
Good
We're
to see
adjourned.
everyone.
You.
Yeah, it was great to see you all.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye.